Hi, this is Brad Constantine, and this is a podcast recording of the Doctrine and Covenants of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Even though this is not an official recording of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, every effort has been made to be as doctrinally and historically accurate as possible. Every day a new section of the Doctrine and Covenants will be released. I hope that you'll visit this often and be able to share this with your friends. Thank you. Hi, and welcome back to the podcast. This is going to be still in Joseph Smith history, but we're going to be reading from verses 27 to 65, or 66. I forget. Anyway, you'll know when we get to the end. I think it's 66. Okay, for these verses, there's a little bit of a heading here, and for verses 27 to 54, it says, Moroni appears to Joseph Smith. Joseph's name is to be known for good and evil among all nations. Moroni tells him of the Book of Mormon and of the coming judgments of the Lord, and quotes many scriptures. The hiding place of the gold plates is revealed. Moroni continues to instruct the prophet. Alrighty, verse 27. I continued to pursue my common vocations in life until the 21st of September, 1823. So this is a little bit over 3 years later. All the time suffering severe persecution. Actually, it's 3.5 years later, isn't it? That's interesting. 3.5 years. How long did Jesus serve in his ministry? 3.5 years. Okay. All the time suffering severe persecution at the hands of all classes of men, both religious and irreligious, because I continued to affirm that I had seen a vision. During the space of time which intervened between the time I had the vision and the year 1823, having been forbidden to join any of the religious sects of the day, and being of very tender years, and persecuted by those who ought to have been my friends, and to have treated me kindly, and if they supposed me to be deluded, to have endeavored in a proper and affectionate manner to have reclaimed me, I was left to all kinds of temptations, and mingling with all kinds of society. I frequently fell into many foolish errors, and displayed the weakness of youth, and the foibles of human nature, which I am sorry to say led me into divers temptations. Offensive in the sight of God, in making this confession, no one need suppose me guilty of any great or malignant sins. A disposition to commit such was never in my nature, but I was guilty of levity, and sometimes associated with jovial company, etc., not consistent with that character which ought to be maintained by one who was called of God as I had been. But this will not seem very strange to anyone who recollects my youth, and is acquainted with my native cheery temperament. In consequence of these things, I often felt condemned for my weakness and imperfections. When on the evening of the above-mentioned 21st of September, after I had retired to my bed for the night, I betook myself to prayer and supplication to Almighty God for forgiveness of all my sins and follies, and also for a manifestation to me, that I might know of my state and standing before him, for I had full confidence in obtaining a divine manifestation, as I previously had one. While I was thus in the act of calling upon God, I discovered a light appearing in my room, which continued to increase until the room was lighter than at noonday, when immediately a personage appeared at my bedside, standing in the air, for his feet did not touch the floor. Notice that, or remember that Joseph also shared his bedroom with his other brothers, and so they're asleep during this vision. Verse 31, He had on a loose robe of most exquisite whiteness. It was a whiteness beyond anything earthly I had ever seen. Nor do I believe that any earthly thing could be made to appear so exceedingly white and brilliant. His hands were naked, and his arms also a little above the wrists. So also were his feet naked, as were his legs a little above the ankles. His head and neck were also bare. I could discover that he had no other clothing on but his robe, for it was open so that I could see into his bosom. Not only was his robe exceedingly white, but his whole person was glorious beyond description, and his countenance truly like lightning. The room was exceedingly light, but not so very bright as immediately around his person. When I first looked upon him, I was afraid, but the fear soon left me. He called me by name, and said unto me that he was a messenger sent from the presence of God to me, and that his name was Moroni, that God had a work for me to do, and that my name should be had for good and evil among all nations, kindreds, and tongues, or that it should be both good and evil spoken of among all people. He said there was a book deposited written upon gold plates, giving an account of the former inhabitants of this continent, and the source from whence they sprang. He also said that the fullness of the everlasting gospel was contained in it, as delivered by the Savior to the ancient inhabitants. In saying that the Book of Mormon contains the fullness of the gospel, what is meant is that it contains those fundamental truths upon which all saving principles must build. These are the principles one should understand before baptism. To be baptized, we need not understand all there is to know about the gospel. We simply need to have laid a foundation of faith and understanding upon which we can continue to build until we have received the fullness of all that the Father has. Verse 35, also that there were 2 stones in silver bows in these stones fastened to a breastplate, which constituted what is called the Urim and Thummim. Deposited with the plates, and the possession and use of these stones were what constituted seers in ancient or former times, and that God had prepared them for the purpose of translating the book. From the Old Testament we learn that the Urim and Thummim was used by priests to receive revelation. Though no clear explanation has been preserved for us, we can deduce that this device consisted of ocular objects belonging to the ephod, or vestment of the high priest. The Urim and Thummim was carried in the breastplate of judgment, which bore the names of the 12 tribes of Israel on 12 precious stones, so as to be on the high priest's heart when he went before the Lord. Possession of the Urim and Thummim was one of the greatest distinctions conferred upon the priestly family, and was connected with the priest's right to stand in the presence of God and to speak in his behalf. Through apostasy, the use of the Urim and Thummim was lost to Israel. Thus, as the Jews returned from their Babylonian captivity, when they were faced with a question they could not answer, it was agreed to postpone their decision until they should rise up a priest with Urim and with Thummim. Hosea described their plight, saying, "For the children of Israel shall abide many days without a king, and without a prince, and without a sacrifice, and without an image, and without an ephod, and without teraphim." Commenting on this verse, one Bible dictionary observed that it seems natural to infer that the teraphim were in these instances the unauthorized substitutes for the Urim. Given that the Book of Mormon was ordained in the councils of heaven to be the scriptural record to gather Israel to the true Messiah, it seems most appropriate that its translator would do so with the aid of the same type of Syriac device by which revelation was given to the 12 tribes anciently. As the spokesman of the Lord was identified by the possession of the Urim and Thummim before the day of Israel's dispersion, so he is identified by the possession of the Urim and Thummim in the great day of gathering. In the Wentworth letter, Joseph Smith said, "With the records was found a curious instrument which the ancients called Urim and Thummim, which consisted of 2 transparent stones set in the rim of a bow fastened to a breastplate. Through the medium of the Urim and Thummim, I have translated the record by the gift and power of God." For further information on the breastplate, we can see a commentary in section 17. Okay. Also, that the Urim and Thummim, Joseph also used what was called a seer stone, in addition to using the Urim and Thummim. Verse 36, after telling me these things, he commenced quoting the prophecies of the Old Testament. He first quoted part of the 3rd chapter of Malachi, and he quoted also the 4th or last chapter of the same prophecy, though with a little variation from the way it reads in our Bibles. Instead of quoting the first verse as it reads in our books, he quoted it thus, "For behold, the day cometh that shall burn as an oven, and all the proud, yea, and all that do wickedly shall burn as stubble, for they that come shall burn them, saith the Lord of hosts, that it shall leave them neither root nor branch." Burn as Moroni to Joseph Smith. I'm sorry, I was looking at something else here. The Joseph Smith translation in Malachi is different. Verse 38, and again he quoted the 5th verse thus, "Behold, I will reveal unto you the priesthood by the hand of Elijah the prophet, before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord." He also quoted the next verse differently, "And he shall plant in the hearts of the children the promises made to the fathers, and the hearts of the children shall turn to their fathers. If it were not so, the whole earth would be utterly wasted at his coming." Elijah came to the Kirtland Temple on the 3rd of April, 1836. A byproduct of this process of being sealed to each other is that those on the earth are sealed to those in heaven and can draw assistance from them. Each generation needs to be welded to the one before it, such that a whole, complete, and perfect union can be made. One of the first things necessary for that union is the organization of the righteous from every dispensation into one eternal family. In this way, all the keys, powers, and glories from the days of Adam to the present are brought together to prepare the earth for the return of its great king. Moroni uses the phrase utterly wasted relative to the purpose of earth life, rather than a curse as used by Malachi. If we do not accomplish the primary purpose for which we came to mortality, namely the forming of an eternal family unit, we have wasted our lives as matters that are not of eternal importance. That was by Joseph Fielding McConkie. Verse 40. In addition to these, he quoted the 11th chapter of Isaiah, saying that it was about to be fulfilled. This prophet, Isaiah tells us, is to be a descendant of both Jesse and Ephraim. It is Joseph Smith. And then he quotes 11th chapter, verses 1 through 16. He quoted also the 3rd chapter of Acts, 22nd and 23rd verses, precisely as they stand in our New Testament. He said that prophet was Christ, but the day was not yet come when they who would not hear his voice should be cut off from among the people, but soon would come. He also quoted the 2nd chapter of Joel from the 28th verse to the last. He also said that this was not yet fulfilled, but soon would be, or was soon to be, and he further stated that the fullness of the Gentiles was soon to come in. He quoted many other passages of Scripture and offered many explanations which cannot be mentioned here. In letters published in the Messenger and Advocate, the church newspaper published in Kirtland between 1834 and 1837, Oliver Cowdery gave a much more detailed account of the things Moroni taught Joseph Smith. He cited 30 texts from the Old and New Testaments that were a part of Moroni's instruction to the prophet. Moroni quoted the following texts from the Bible to Joseph Smith during his visits during the night of the 21st of September and 1823 and the next morning. I won't go through all of this. There's just tons of verses that he mentions. Deuteronomy 32, 23 to 24, verse 43, and then Psalms 91, verses 6, and 100. Psalms 100, Psalms 107. Anyway, like I said, there's 30 different scriptures that Moroni quoted that Oliver Cowdery kept as a record for us to know what was mentioned. Obviously, because it takes so long to read all that, I'm going to skip through that. Alrighty, down to verse 42. Again he told me that when I got those plates of which he had spoken, for the time that they should be obtained was not yet fulfilled, I should not show them to any person. Wherefore at that day when the book shall be delivered unto the man of whom I have spoken, the book shall be hid from the eyes of the world, that the eyes of none shall behold it, save it be that 3 witnesses shall behold it by the power of God besides him to whom the book shall be delivered, and they shall testify to the truth of the book and the things therein. So that was out of the book of Ether, mentioning about the 3 witnesses. Verse 42 continued, neither the breastplate with the Urim and Thummim, only to those to whom I should be commanded to show them. If I did, I should be destroyed. While he was conversing with me about the plates, the vision was opened to my mind that I could see the place where the plates were deposited, and that so clearly and distinctly that I knew the place again when I visited it. After the communication, I saw the light in the room begin to gather immediately around the person of him who had been speaking to me, and to continue to do so until the room was again left dark, except just around him, when instantly I saw as it were a conduit open right up into heaven, and he ascended till he entirely disappeared, and the room was left as it had been before this heavenly light had made its appearance. I lay musing on the singularity of the scene, and marveling greatly at what had been told me by this extraordinary messenger, when in the midst of my meditation I suddenly discovered that my room was again beginning to get lighted, and in an instant, as it were, the same heavenly messenger was again by my bedside. He commenced and again related the very same things which he had done at his first visit, without the least variation, which having done, he informed me of great judgments which were coming upon the earth with great desolations by famine, sword, and pestilence, and that these grievous judgments would come on the earth in this generation. Having related these things, he again ascended as he had done before. By this time, so deep were the impressions made on my mind that sleep had fled from my eyes, and I lay overwhelmed in astonishment at what I had both seen and heard. But what was my surprise when again I beheld the same messenger at my bedside, and heard him rehearse or repeat over again to me the same things as before, and added a caution to me, telling me that Satan would try to tempt me, in consequence of the indigent circumstances of my father's family, to get the plates for the purposes of getting rich. This he forbade me, saying that I must have no other object in view in getting the plates, but to glorify God, and must not be influenced by any other motive than that of building his kingdom, otherwise I could not get them. After this third visit, he again ascended into heaven as before, and I was again left to ponder on the strangeness of what I had just experienced, when almost immediately after the heavenly messenger had ascended from me for the third time, the cock crowed, and I found that that day was approaching, so that the interviews must have occupied the whole of the night. As you think about this, he had 3 visits during the night, and let's say that he slept or that it would have been about an 8-hour period when sleep would have been normal. I'm wondering if these interviews would have taken about 2.5 hours each. Just to wonder, just thought. All right. Verse 48. I shortly after arose from my bed and as usual went to the necessary labors of the day, but in attempting to work as at other times, I found my strength so exhausted as to render me entirely unable. My father, who was laboring along with me, discovered something to be wrong with me and told me to go home. Now, it doesn't mention it here, but one of the things that Moroni told Joseph was to tell his father about the vision, but he doesn't do that. I started with the intention of going to the house, but in attempting to cross the fence out of the field where we were, my strength entirely failed me, and I fell helpless on the ground, and for a time was quite unconscious of anything. The first thing that I can recollect was a voice speaking unto me, calling me by name. I looked up and beheld the same messenger standing over my head, surrounded by light as before. He then again related unto me all that he had related to me the previous night, and commanded me to go to my father, and tell him of the vision and commandments which I had received. I obeyed. I returned to my father in the field and rehearsed the whole matter to him. He replied to me that it was of God and told me to go and do as commanded by the messenger. I left the field and went to the place where the messenger had told me the plates were deposited, and owing to the distinctness of the vision which I had had concerning it, I knew the place the instant that I arrived there. Convenient to the village of Manchester, Ontario County, New York, stands a hill of considerable size, and the most elevated of any in the neighborhood. On the west side of this hill, not far from the top, under a stone of considerable size, lay the plates deposited in a stone box. This stone was thick and rounding in the middle on the upper side, and thinner towards the edges, so that the middle part of it was visible above the ground, but the edge all around was covered with earth. Having removed the earth, I obtained a lever, which I got fixed under the edge of the stone, and with a little exertion raised it up. I looked in, and there indeed did I behold the plates, the Urim and Thummim, and the breastplate, as stated by the messenger. The box in which they lay was formed by laying stones together in some kind of cement. In the bottom of the box were laid 2 stones crossways of the box, and on these stones lay the plates and the other things with them. I made an attempt to take them out, but was forbidden by the messenger. Now, let me give you a little bit more explanation of what happens here as Joseph tries to get the plates. Now remember that Moroni warned him not to be thinking about selling anything or getting money or anything from anything in the box. Oliver Cowdery gave us a description of a very important lesson taught by the youthful prophet, or taught to the youthful prophet. When Joseph first attempted to take possession of the record, a shock was produced upon his system by an invisible power which deprived him in a measure of his natural strength. He desisted for an instant and then made another attempt, but was more sensibly shocked than before. What was the occasion of this he knew not, but there was the pure unsullied record as had been described. He had heard of the power of enchantment and 1,000 like stories which held the hidden treasures of the earth, and supposed that physical exertion and personal strength was only necessary to enable him to yet obtain the object of his wish. He therefore made the third attempt with an increased exertion, when his strength failed him more than at either of the former times, and without premeditating, he exclaimed, Why can I not obtain this record? Another account said that he was knocked completely flat on his back from the shock that he received. Because you have not kept the commandments of the Lord, answered a voice within a seeming short distance. He looked, and to his astonishment, there stood the angel who had previously given him the directions concerning this matter. In an instant, all the former instructions, the great intelligence concerning Israel in the last days, were brought to his mind. He thought of the time when his heart was fervently engaged in prayer to the Lord, when his spirit was contrite, and when this holy messenger from the skies unfolded the wonderful things connected with this record. He had come, to be sure, and found the word of the angel fulfilled concerning the reality of the record, but he had failed to remember the great end for which they had been kept, and in consequence could not have power to take them into his possession and bear them away. At that, remember, Joseph is only 17 years old too. I mean, he's just a kid. At that instant he looked to the Lord in prayer, and as he prayed, darkness began to disperse from his mind, and his soul was lit up as it was the evening before, and he was filled with the Holy Spirit. And again did the Lord manifest his condescension and mercy. The heavens were opened, and the glory of the Lord shone round about, and rested upon him. While he thus stood gazing and admiring, the angel said, Look. And as he thus spake, he beheld the prince of darkness, surrounded by his innumerable train of associates. All this passed before him, and the heavenly messenger said, All this is shown, the good, the evil, the holy, and impure, the glory of God and the power of darkness, that you may know hereafter the two powers, and never be influenced or overcome by that wicked one. Behold, whatever entices and leads to good and to do good is of God, and whatever does not is of that wicked one. It is he that fills the hearts of men with evil, to walk in darkness and blaspheme God. And you may learn from henceforth that his ways are to destruction, but the way of holiness is peace and rest. Notice what Moroni says here, that that which leads to good is good. He's quoting from himself and from his father in the Book of Mormon. Interesting, isn't it? Well, I think so. Let's see, where did I leave off? I got distracted here. Okay. You now see why you could not obtain this record, that the commandment was strict, and that if ever these sacred things are obtained, they must be by prayer and faithfulness in obeying the Lord. They are not deposited here for the sake of accumulating gain and wealth for the glory of this world. They were sealed by the prayer of faith, and because of the knowledge which they contain, they are of no worth among the children of men, only for their knowledge. On them is contained the fullness of the gospel of Jesus Christ, as it was given to his people on this land, and when it shall be brought forth by the power of God, it shall be carried to the Gentiles, of whom many will receive it, and after will the seed of Israel be brought into the fold of their Redeemer, by obeying it also. Those who kept the commandments of the Lord on this land desired this at his hand, and through the prayer of faith obtained the promise that if their descendants should transgress and fall away, that a record might be kept, and in the last days come to their children. These things are sacred and must be kept so, for the promise of the Lord concerning them must be fulfilled. No man can obtain them if his heart is impure, because they contain that which is sacred. And besides, should they be entrusted in unholy hands, the knowledge could not come to the world, because they cannot be interpreted by the learning of this generation. Consequently, they would be considered of no worth, only as precious metal. Therefore, remember that they are to be translated by the gift and power of God. Continuing verse 53, and was again informed that the time for bringing them forth had not yet arrived. Neither would it until 4 years from that time. Now Joseph is saying that it won't be for 4 years, but at the time that this happens, he doesn't know that. He just thinks he has to come back next year. But he told me that I should come to that place precisely in 1 year from that time, and that he would meet me there, or that he would there meet me, and that I should continue to do so until the time come for obtaining the plates. Verse 54, accordingly, as I had been commanded, I went at the end of each year, and at each time I found the same messenger there, and received instruction and intelligence from him at each of our interviews, respecting what the Lord was going to do, and how and in what manner his kingdom was to be conducted in the last days. Just a little story, too, about coming forth of the plates and Joseph's attempt the next year to come and get them. When he came back the next year, 1 year after this first time, and he opens up the box again, and he does pull the plates out this time. He sets them down on the ground, and then he turns back and looks back into the box, and then when he turns back, the plates are missing. And he yells out, "What happened to the plates?" And Moroni says, "I told you to watch these and to keep them safe. You lost track of them, and so you're going to have to come back another year." Joseph then thought that at the end of the 4 years, that if he didn't get them on this trip, that he was not going to get them. And so Joseph was very anxious this last time to get them. For the next few verses, there's a section heading, Joseph Smith marries Emma Hale. He receives the gold plates from Moroni and translates some of the characters. Martin Harris shows characters and translation to Professor Anthon, who says, "I cannot read a sealed book." So, verse 55, as my father's worldly circumstances were very limited, we were under the necessity of laboring with our hands, hiring out by day's work and otherwise as we could get opportunity. Sometimes we were at home and sometimes abroad, and by continuous labor were enabled to get a comfortable maintenance. In the year 1823, my father's family met with a great affliction by the death of my eldest brother Alvin. I'm not going to read the account of Alvin's death because it takes too long, but you can read that in another place, and I also have it on one of my Doctrine and Covenants podcasts. In the month of October 1825, I hired with an old gentleman by the name of Josiah Stoll, who lived in Chenango County, state of New York. He had heard something of a silver mine having been opened by the Spaniards in Harmony, Susquehanna County, state of Pennsylvania, and had previous to my hiring to him been digging in order, if possible, to discover the mine. After I went to live with him, he took me with the rest of his hands to dig for the silver mine, at which I continued to work for nearly a month, without success in our undertaking, and finally I prevailed with the old gentleman to cease digging after it. Hence arose the very prevalent story of my having been a money digger. During the time that I was thus employed, I was put to board with a Mr. Isaac Hale of that place. It was there I first saw my wife, his daughter, Emma Hale. On the 18th of January, 1827, we were married while I was yet employed in the service of Mr. Stoll. So Joseph is 22 years old, 21 years old when he got married. Verse 58, owing to my continuing to assert that I had seen a vision, persecution still followed me, and my wife's father's family were very much opposed to our being married. I was therefore under the necessity of taking her elsewhere, so we went and were married at the house of Squire Tarbill in South Bainbridge, Chenango County, New York. Immediately after my marriage, I left Mr. Stoll's and went to my father's and farmed with him that season. At length the time arrived for obtaining the plates, the Urim and Thummim, and the breastplate. On the 22nd day of September, also think of the time period that this is happening in. This is during the Feast of Tabernacles in ancient Israel. Here we are having come forth the Book of Mormon, the plates during the Feast of Tabernacles, Day of Atonement. No coincidence. The 22nd day of September, 1827, having gone as usual at the end of another year to the place where they were deposited, the same heavenly messenger delivered them up to me with this charge, that I should be responsible for them, that if I should let them go carelessly or through any neglect of mine, I should be cut off, but that if I would use all my endeavors to preserve them until he, the messenger, should call for them, they should be protected. When Joseph first took the plates into his hands, the angel of the Lord stood by and said, now you have got the record into your own hands, and you are but a man. Therefore you will have to be watchful and faithful to your trust, or you will be overpowered by wicked men, for they will lay every plan and scheme that is possible to get them away from you. And if you do not take heed continually, they will succeed. While they were in my hands, I could keep them, and no man had power to take them away. But now I give them up to you. Beware and look well to your ways, and you shall have power to retain them until the time for them to be translated. The prophet Joseph Smith had to actively protect the plates from the moment he received them. He was creative in his choice of hiding places, and in many instances he depended on inspiration from God to fulfill his responsibility. Lucy Mack Smith recorded that Joseph first hid the plates in a hollow birch log. When he later returned to retrieve them, Joseph took the plates from their place and, wrapping them in his linen frock, put them under his arm and started for the house. After walking a short distance in the road, he thought it would be safer to go across through the woods. Traveling some distance after he left the road, he came to a large windfall, and as he was jumping over a log, a man sprang up from behind and gave him a heavy blow with a gun. Joseph turned around and knocked him to the ground, and then ran at the top of his speed. About half a mile further, he was attacked again in precisely the same way. He soon brought this one down also and ran on again, but before he got home, he was accosted the third time with a severe stroke with a gun. When he struck the last one, he dislocated his thumb, which, however, he did not notice till he came in sight of the house. He threw himself down in the corner of the fence to recover his breath. As soon as he was able he rose and finished his race for the house. When he arrived, although altogether speechless from fright and exhaustion. After Joseph arrived home, the plates were placed in a chest and secreted under a hearthstone in the Smith home. Later, Joseph hid the plates in the Smith's cooper shop across the street from the house. During his and Emma's removal to Harmony, Pennsylvania, he hid them in a barrel of beans. One may wonder what those who sought the plates would have done had they ever obtained them, and whether their only purpose was to obtain them for the gold of which they were made. Regardless, these people were determined to destroy the work of God. Mormon wrote, having been commanded of the Lord that I should not suffer the records that which had been handed down by our fathers, which were sacred to fall in the hands of the Lamanites, for the Lamanites would destroy them. Therefore I hid them up in the hill Cumorah, all the records which had been entrusted to me by the hand of the Lord. Verse 60, I soon found out the reason why I had received such strict charges to keep them safe, and why it was that the messenger had said that when I had done what was required at my hand, he would call for them. For no sooner was it known that I had them than the most strenuous exertions were used to get them from me. Every stratagem that could be invented was resorted to for that purpose. The persecution became more bitter and severe than before, and multitudes were on the alert continually to get them from me, if possible. But by the wisdom of God they remained safe in my hands until I had accomplished by them what was required at my hand. Joseph Smith kept the Urim and Thummim constantly about his person, by the use of which he could in a moment tell whether the plates were in any danger. When, according to arrangements, the messenger called for them, I delivered them up to him, and he has them in his charge until this day, being the 2nd day of May, 1838. We know of at least 23 instances when Joseph saw the angel Moroni. That's at least that we have recorded. Verse 61, the excitement, however, still continued, and rumor with her 1,000 tongues was all the time employed in circulating falsehoods about my father's family and about myself. If I were to relate 1,000th part of them, it would fill up volumes. The persecution, however, became so intolerable that I was under the necessity of leaving Manchester and going with my wife to Susquehanna County in the state of Pennsylvania. While preparing to start, being very poor and the persecution so heavy upon us that there was no probability that we would ever be otherwise, in the midst of our afflictions we found a friend in a gentleman by the name of Martin Harris, who came to us and gave me $50 to assist us on our journey. Mr. Harris was a resident of Palmyra Township, Wayne County in the state of New York, and a farmer of respectability. By this timely aid was I enabled to reach the place of my destination in Pennsylvania, and immediately after my arrival there I commenced copying the characters off the plates. I copied a considerable number of them, and by means of the Urim and Thummim I translated some of them, which I did between the time I arrived at the house of my wife's father in the month of December and the February following. Sometime in this month of February, the aforementioned Mr. Harris came to our place, got the characters which I had drawn off the plates, and started with them to the city of New York for what took place relative to him, and the characters I refer to his own account of the circumstances as he related them to me after his return, which was as follows. I went to the city of New York and presented the characters which had been translated with the translation thereof to Professor Charles Anthon, a gentleman celebrated for his literary attainments. Professor Anthon stated that the translation was correct, more so than any he had before seen translated from the Egyptian. I then showed him those which were not yet translated, and he said that they were Egyptian, Chaldaic, Assyric, and Arabic, and he said they were true characters. He gave me a certificate certifying to the people of Palmyra that they were true characters, and that the translation of such of them as had been translated was also correct. I took the certificate and put it in my pocket, and was just leaving the house when Mr. Anthon called me back and asked me how the young man found out that there were gold plates in the place where he found them. I answered that an angel of God had revealed it unto him. He then said to me, "Let me see that certificate." I accordingly took it out of my pocket and gave it to him, when he took it and tore it into pieces, saying that there was no such thing as ministering of angels, and that if I would bring the plates to him, he would translate them. I informed him that part of the plates were sealed, and that I was forbidden to bring them. He replied, "I cannot read a sealed book." I left him and went to Mr. Mitchell, who sanctioned what Professor Anthon had said respecting both the characters and the translation. Although it's true that there never were greater things made manifest than those which were made manifest unto the brother of Jared, it is also true that others were shown things equally great. Such noble souls as Adam, Enoch, Abraham, Moses, Nephi, John the Revelator, the prophet Joseph Smith, and others were given views of things from the foundation of the world to the eternities. Bruce R. McConkie expounded on the scriptural description of those things contained in the sealed part of the plates, indicating that an account of life and pre-existence, of the creation of all things, of the fall and the atonement, and the second coming, of temple ordinances in their fullness, of the ministry and mission of translated beings, of life in the spirit world in both paradise and hell, of the kingdoms of glory to be inhabited by resurrected beings, and many such things must surely be recorded thereon. This part of the record will come forth during the millennium, for the things which are sealed shall not be delivered in the day of the wickedness and abominations of the people. So that's the end of this section. I bear testimony that these things are true, that Joseph did see the angel Moroni and obtain the gold plates from which the Book of Mormon was translated. And I bear that testimony in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. See you next time. Bye.